Hey coffee nerds, or potentially future water nerds, because today I'm gonna be doing a side-by-side brew of the Peak water filter with something that maybe most of you have or some of you have at home, the Brita filter. And I'm gonna be talking a little bit about the main differences between the two. So this really is just an overview. I'm not gonna get so much into the water science, mostly because it's really heavy. I don't know too much about it. The founder of this Peak water filter, Maxwell Kelowna Dashwood, he actually wrote a whole book. It's a really intensive water book explaining water. And so I'm not gonna get into it today, but if you are interested in learning a little bit more, James Hoffman actually made an amazing water video and kind of broke down this filter and how it works. So I'll leave a little link up here. You can check it out. He gets into the nitty-gritty. So they both have benefits depending on what your needs are, depending on what you're looking for, your budget. But I will say that I love this thing and I love the concept. So just as a quick note, the Brita you can pretty much find anywhere in any department, grocery store, most places in the world, as I mentioned, and it goes for, I got this one for around 30 euros here in Barcelona. The filters themselves, if you divide it out, come to around 5 euros, whereas the Peak, well, it's manufactured fully in the UK, and so if you want this, even if you want this filter, even if you're in the UK or anywhere else in the world, you will have to order it online. And it goes for around 57 euros if you do the conversion from pounds, and then each filter comes to around 16 euros per filter. So what I'm gonna do is actually just fill up this kettle, and I wanna get these two waters at the same temperature for brewing so we can do a side-by-side. So what I'm gonna do is put some of the Peak in here and then heat that up on my electric kettle. And then I'm actually going to use this little pitcher here so that we can heat some water on the stove at the same time. In terms of brewing, I'm actually gonna be using this little handy brewer here. It's called the BREW, and it's also based out of the UK. So this really is the British episode. And I'm gonna do a classic brew setup here. They actually run on the Kalita filter. So anyways, you know the drill. A lot of grinding, a lot of weighing, heating up water, as you know. But what I want to share while the water is heating is the main difference. So as you can see here, there's a little dial on the top of the Peak. This allows us to essentially regulate how much of the minerals are making it through into the filtered water in the bottom. As opposed to the Brita, it does filter a lot of things out, but it's more or less the same filtration regardless of which water you're using, where you are in the world. And so you won't be able to cater the water, the mineral content that's in here, depending on where you live. So what they actually send is these test strips, so you can get really sciencey and test out the water in your hometown or even in your neighborhood to see essentially what the hardness or the softness of your water is. Here, I didn't have the test strips because I'm borrowing this filter from a good friend of mine. So he didn't have any more test strips. He already knew what his tap was like. So what I did is I went online and I found a web page that essentially told me all the details about my street, about my little neighborhood here. So what I found, not surprised, is we have very hard water here in Barcelona. So I put this according to the numbers that showed up and also the chart on the Peak Water website. I put my dial to hard, the hardest it can go, because I want to make sure that it filters out, you know, it's saying that this is hard water. So it's gonna filter out as much of those minerals that we don't want in our cup of coffee. Anyways, that's the main difference here. If you live in a city where it's, you know, more in the medium range, you can set that dial to make sure you have a good composition of calcium and magnesium in the filtered water, which really are good minerals for coffee. So that's essentially what this is doing. I just replaced the filter on here so we know it's as fresh as possible. I also just replaced the filter on here so we can really get a good sense of what both of these water filters are doing. So our first coffee here on the Aurea, and this is water at 98 degrees Celsius. I find that works really well with this coffee, which is a Rwanda. And as I mentioned, this is the water from the Peak filter. And so we'll brew that up. I'm just gonna do 15 grams, as I mentioned, to 225 milliliters. And then we're gonna pour this water in here, heat it up really quick again, and make another side by side. And that last coffee came out in around 2 minutes, so I'm gonna try to replicate that here. And then in the meantime, I'm actually gonna heat up some tap water, as I mentioned. While that water heats up, let's let these coffees cool down, because at this temperature, it's gonna be much harder. And my taste buds just are not prepared for heats like this. And in terms of tasting these two coffees, I'm gonna be using a little cupping spoon here. So this is a standardized way of tasting coffee in the industry. This is obviously not a cupping per se, because I just brewed these by filter, but the process is the same in terms of tasting. And so essentially what you do is allow the coffee to kind of sit in the spoon here and slurp it up. That is cool enough to drink now. That is not too hot, which is good, but if it is, will burn your tongue. So now I'm gonna do a quick rinse here. Make sure not to contaminate. I mean, it's the same coffee, but yeah, so those are two of the same coffee, but different flavors going on. And of course, this is not a blind tasting. This is super subjective. I already said that I really like the Peak, but I wanted to kind of just walk through what you might expect from the flavors that are coming out, or at least what I get, what are the first initial responses that I get, because I'm also curious for myself. This is still pretty hot. Cool it down a little bit more. Let's see how these are panning out. This coffee in general is very, very nice, very juicy. To me, reminds me of some nuts, but also red fruits, blue fruits. There's definitely a lot of acidity, but not too much. It was not a super light roast. On this side, a lot more sort of soft, more rounded. So there's the acidity, but it's not so sharp, tingling the back of your tongue or the sides of your tongue. Whereas this one, more dryness on the sides of the back of my tongue, as I mentioned. And now this one, this is the Brita again. And that's very good too. There is definitely that acidity coming through, but I find it a little bit more of like a flat acidity. So it's kind of coating the entirety of my tongue, not so much all on the back. It is a little bit dry, but sharper I would say in comparison. So if I'm just, yeah, it's kind of like biting into, I wouldn't say exactly like green apple, but sort of like that. It's just like the green apple flavor, but missing a little bit of that sweetness. The sweetness is kind of dried up. And then kind of going back to the Peak, yeah, the acidity is there. It's just more delicate. It does remind me a little bit of like a peppery spiciness in combination with fruit, which can be very good. So that's kind of like my breakdown. All very good, but it's more about what I'm also curious about and concerned about, I guess, when drinking coffee is like, how's the aftertaste? How is it gonna affect my tongue and my mouth after I've drank the coffee, after I'm kind of like going about my day? And I noticed that sometimes a lot of coffees, if they're under extracted, over extracted, or just happen to be using a different type of water or different variables, it can really affect my tongue. So that's something that I like to look for, as like a little bit more pleasant aftertaste, not as lingering, I guess. Yeah, honestly, this is my first time doing it. I'm doing it kind of on the fly. I'm quite impressed. Yeah, I'm impressed by this Peak. Even if you do have the test strips, even if you looked it up online, what's the water composition in your area, you can still play around with it. And that's what I'm gonna do as well. I wanna do some more side-by-sides with the same coffee and just change the dial a little bit, maybe go a little bit less filtration, a little bit more, as much as I can go. Anyways, that is the Peak. Again, founded and designed by Maxwell Kelowna Dashwood and his team in the UK. He has an amazing cafe over there in Bath and a roastery, Kelowna Coffee. And I really want to talk with him. I want to bring him into this conversation because I deliberately kept this very baseline, more about the coffees, but he really is the expert. So if you're interested in tuning into that, leave a comment and maybe share with me some questions that you'd like me to ask him. I'm gonna get on a call with him very soon and be able to share that over YouTube. So expect that in the near future. Very excited, and now would be a great time to subscribe if you do want to tune in for that. Thanks again. See you next time. This is the one. Cheers. Mmm.